My wife and I arrived at my daughter's promotion party, and before we even fully stepped inside, she shifted slightly in front of me, using her body to block me from view. "Hide that limp. You're embarrassing me," she whispered under her breath. I did what I've done for the past 40 years. I obeyed. I've always been the invisible man, the disabled father, the man on disability benefits that no one really talks about. But there was one truth they never knew. When the billionaire entered, he completely overlooked my daughter's polite bow and her outstretched hand. Instead, he walked straight toward me, gripped my hand firmly, and leaned in close enough to whisper, "I've been looking for you for 40 years." The entire ballroom seemed to freeze in that moment. My wife's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor, and the secret I had buried for 4 decades was suddenly on the verge of coming to light. Comment your age plus your biggest regret in 3 words. Go. I'll try to reply to as many as I can. And drop a like if you think this billionaire is about to change Ethan's life, or destroy it. It all happened on the night my daughter was promoted to vice president. Madison had rented a grand ballroom at one of those elegant downtown Chicago hotels for her celebration. I should have felt proud. And I was. But that's not what stayed with me the most about that evening. What stayed with me was Eleanor gripping my arm right before we walked in. "Don't limp, Ethan," she muttered sharply, "and stay toward the back. This is Madison's night, not yours." I gave a small nod. After 40 years of marriage, I had learned exactly when silence was the safest choice. The ballroom was filled with executives dressed in expensive suits, holding champagne flutes and laughing louder than necessary. Madison stood near the front in a striking red dress, surrounded by colleagues congratulating her. When we entered, she glanced in our direction, waved briefly at Eleanor, and completely overlooked me. That was nothing new. "There," Eleanor said, pointing toward a corner near the bar. "You can stand there, and don't wander." She walked straight to Madison while I slowly made my way to the spot she had chosen for me. My limp always worsened in the evening, and the brace under my shirt pressed harshly into my lower back with every step. L3 and L4 vertebrae, the doctors used to call it. I simply called it the permanent reminder that some wounds never truly heal. From that corner, I watched the party unfold as if I weren't even part of it. Large presentation screens displayed architectural renderings of Madison's latest project, a luxury high-rise planned for downtown. I narrowed my eyes at the address shown at the bottom, near the loop, 4th floor highlighted in the plans. Something about that address made my spine tighten. I had seen it before, hadn't I? But trying to remember felt like trying to grasp smoke. The harder I tried, the more my back throbbed. Another screen shifted to a memorial plaque design. "In honor of unknown heroes, 1984. Beneath it was a grainy group photograph of men in uniforms, their faces too blurred to recognize. Looking at it made my chest feel oddly tight, even though I couldn't explain why. Madison's voice carried confidently across the room, honoring the past while building the future of Chicago. I shifted my stance, attempting to ease the ache running down my spine. 67 years old, and I couldn't even stand comfortably at my own daughter's celebration without pain shooting through my back. No one paid attention to me standing there. I had mastered the art of being unseen. Still, that address kept nagging at me. Downtown Chicago, 4th floor. Why did it feel so significant? Why did thinking about it make the old injury flare as if someone were pressing directly on a nerve? Gradually, the crowd quieted as the host stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" Conversations faded. "Tonight, we are honored to welcome a very special keynote speaker," the host continued. "A man who has reshaped Chicago's skyline and whose vision has transformed our city." I absent-mindedly rubbed my lower back, feeling the raised ridge of scar tissue beneath my shirt. Something was about to change. I could sense it the way you sense a storm before the first drop of rain falls. "Please join me in welcoming the CEO of Ashford Development, Mr. Raymond Ashford." The ballroom burst into applause. That address still lingered in my mind. Downtown Chicago. 4th floor. Just thinking about it made my back ache more intensely, yet the reason remained out of reach. Then the CEO walked in, and everything shifted. He entered like a man who owned the room, and in Chicago real estate he practically did. Raymond Ashford stepped through the ballroom doors with a presence strong enough to silence conversations mid-sentence. Silver hair, a tailored suit, an unmistakable aura of authority. But there was something else, too. The way he held his left arm slightly guarded, as if it still remembered an old injury. Madison hurried toward the greeting line almost instantly. Eleanor tugged my elbow. "Come on," she hissed. "We need to be in the greeting line." She positioned me like an object in a display. Madison at the front with her hand ready, Eleanor beside her, and me behind them, literally hidden behind Eleanor's shoulder. "Stand there," she whispered, "and don't speak." Raymond Ashford moved across the floor as people naturally stepped aside. Madison adjusted her dress. Eleanor smoothed her hair. Both of them were so focused on impressing him that they failed to notice what I did. He wasn't looking at them at all. His gaze was searching behind them, scanning as if he were looking for something specific. Then his eyes locked onto me. I was subtly shifting my weight, easing the pressure in my lower back, favoring my right leg to reduce the strain on the left. A movement I had repeated thousands of times over the years. Raymond Ashford's face suddenly drained of color. He stopped walking entirely, just 3 feet away from Madison's extended hand, his eyes fixed on my legs and the way I stood. "Mr. Ashford," Madison said brightly, her hand still out. "It's such an honor." He walked straight past her without even acknowledging her hand, as if she wasn't there at all. Her smile faltered instantly. Eleanor tried next. "Mr. Ashford, welcome." He passed her too, ignoring her rehearsed smile and carefully chosen words as if they meant nothing. The ballroom fell into a stunned silence. Hundreds of eyes watched the break in protocol. CEOs didn't ignore their hosts. But Raymond Ashford wasn't looking at the hosts. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, close enough to see the tension tightening his jaw. His gaze moved to my legs, to the stance I carried, to the limp I had been told to hide. "What is happening?" Eleanor whispered sharply. "Ethan, what did you do?" I couldn't respond because Raymond Ashford was staring straight at me, and the emotion barely restrained on his face made my heart pound harder with every second. "Mr. Ashford," Madison attempted again, her voice strained now. "I'm the vice president of—" Raymond slowly lifted one hand, signaling for silence. "Wait." His eyes never left me. "That stance," he said quietly, his voice rough and uneven. "The way you shift your weight, the left leg." My mouth went completely dry. "How did you—" "40 years," he cut in. His eyes moved slowly from my legs to my face. There was recognition there. Grief. Something deeper I couldn't even name. "I've spent 40 years searching for the man who stands exactly like that." The ballroom had fallen into absolute silence. Raymond took another step closer, his hands trembling slightly. "That limp," he whispered, yet in the quiet room everyone heard it clearly. I would recognize it anywhere. Eleanor tried to tug me backward. "What is happening?" she hissed under her breath. "Ethan, who is this man?" But Raymond Ashford never took his eyes off mine. He stepped even closer, close enough that I could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair that matched my own, and an expression so heavy it made my chest feel tight. "L3, L4 vertebrae," he said softly. Each word sounded like it cost him effort. "Crushed by a steel beam, 1984. My blood turned cold. How did he know that? The doctors had used those exact terms, L3 and L4, the clinical language I'd heard countless times in hospital rooms and rehabilitation sessions. But that was 40 years ago, and I had never told anyone except the doctors. "Downtown Chicago," Raymond continued, his hands now visibly shaking. "4th floor. You went back 3 times. The room seemed to tilt. 4th floor. Downtown Chicago. Went back 3 times. And suddenly, I wasn't in a ballroom anymore. I was 27 again. Smoke filling my lungs, flames crawling up the walls, and a young man's voice screaming for help from somewhere above. "You," I whispered, the word barely escaping my throat. "You were on the 4th floor." Raymond's eyes filled with tears. He nodded once, sharply, as if he was holding himself together by sheer force. "I've been looking for you for 40 years, Captain Hayes." Captain Hayes. No one had called me that in 4 decades. "Dad?" Madison's voice sounded distant and confused. What is he talking about? You know, Mr. Ashford, this is absurd, Eleanor began. Ethan was never... Raymond turned his head and gave her a single look. That was all it took. She fell silent instantly. Then he faced me again and placed both hands gently on my shoulders, not gripping, not demanding, just holding, as if he needed to be sure I was real. Everyone needs to hear this, he said, but he was speaking to me, not to them. This story, what you did. His voice grew louder as he addressed the stunned ballroom. What this man did. Nearly 300 people stood frozen, watching us, watching me. The night security guard who had spent 40 years trying to disappear. Raymond's hands tightened slightly on my shoulders. Captain Hayes, he said, his voice cracking on the title. Will you tell them what happened? Or should I? I looked at him, truly looked at him, and beneath the expensive suit, the silver hair, and the success written all over him, I saw a 27-year-old man clutching architectural plans in burned hands, coughing through smoke, convinced he was going to die. 40 years vanished in an instant. It's been 40 years, I said slowly, my own voice sounding unfamiliar to my ears. But I'll tell it. Raymond closed his eyes briefly, like I had just given him something he had been waiting his entire life to hear. Then he helped me step forward, actually helped me, one hand steady on my elbow, guiding me past where Eleanor and Madison stood frozen, past them into the center of the room where everyone could see me, where my limp was no longer hidden, where my age was undeniable, where 40 years of invisibility came to an end. He remained beside me, his hand still resting on my shoulder. Brothers, that's what we must have looked like. Two old men bound by something the rest of the room couldn't yet understand. Tell them, Raymond said quietly, only for me to hear. Tell them about the fire. I took a slow breath and looked out at the sea of faces. Madison's pale, confused expression. Eleanor's tight-lipped anger. Hundreds of strangers who had no idea what they were about to hear. I closed my eyes. The ballroom disappeared. The suits, the chandeliers, Madison's wounded expression, Eleanor's frustration, everything faded like smoke. I was 27 again, standing in front of a 6-story building in downtown Chicago that was being consumed by fire, and the call had just come in. I stood there in the ballroom with my eyes closed, and suddenly I was back. 3:47 p.m., June 14th, 1984. Structure fire downtown. Partial collapse. Multiple victims trapped. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio as Engine 17 sped toward the loop. I was 27 years old. Captain Ethan Hayes, Chicago Fire Department. 5 years on the job. I thought I had seen everything. I was wrong. The building was 6 stories tall. Smoke poured out of every window. We arrived at 3:53 p.m. The structure groaned like a dying animal. People were screaming from the windows, some waving shirts, others simply shouting for help. My lieutenant, Daniel Mercer, grabbed my shoulder. Hayes, this place is coming down. We get one chance. Make it count. The first rescue took 8 minutes. We found 6 people trapped on the 2nd floor, office workers huddled behind overturned desks. The smoke was thick, black, and suffocating. We led them out through the emergency stairwell. 6 lives safe outside. Daniel pulled me back. The structure's failing. We got who we could. There are more up there, I said. Ethan, don't. I went back in. The 3rd floor was chaos. The fire had spread across the east wing, devouring everything in its path. We found 5 more people, 3 secretaries, a janitor, and a young man in a suit clutching a roll of blueprints. He couldn't have been older than me. His left hand was burned, his eyes wide with fear. Come on, I shouted, grabbing his arm. Leave the blueprints. I can't, he coughed. They're the only copies. I didn't argue. I just pulled him along. We got all 5 out. The young architect stumbled onto the sidewalk, coughing, still holding those blueprints. Through the smoke, he looked at me and whispered, "Thank you." I simply nodded. 11 people saved. My job should have been finished. Then we heard the scream from the 4th floor. Daniel grabbed my jacket. Hayes, no, that's an order. Then fire me when I get back. The stairs were gone. I had to climb through wreckage, twisted metal, burning wood, collapsing drywall. The heat was unbearable, my mask fogged with every breath. The fourth-floor hallway felt like a furnace. And there he was, the same young architect I had just rescued. He had gone back inside. "What are you doing?" I shouted over the roar of the flames. "The blueprints," he said desperately. "I dropped them. The originals are in my office. Are you out of your mind? They're 3 years of work. I can't lose them." A support beam cracked loudly above us. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed him and shoved him toward the window. "Go!" He stumbled as I pushed him onto the emergency ladder. He fell onto the platform outside just as the ceiling gave way. The steel beam struck my back. I heard it before I fully felt it, a metallic shriek followed by a sound like a gunshot. My spine. The world tilted violently as I hit the floor face first, the beam pinning me down. I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't feel anything below my waist. The last thing I remember was smoke, fire, and the young man's face above the wreckage, screaming for help. I woke up 3 days later in Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The doctor stood beside my bed, chart in hand. "Captain Hayes, you're very lucky to be alive. My legs, you have a crush injury to your L3 and L4 vertebrae. The steel beam compressed your spinal cord. You will walk again." He paused. "But your firefighting career is over." I stared at the ceiling. 27 years old. My career, my identity, my life, gone in a single afternoon. 6 weeks later, Mayor Grant pinned a medal on my chest. 16 lives, he said. 16 families who get to go home because of you. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes. They gave me a plaque, shook my hand, took photographs. The young architect came too. Raymond Ashford. That was when I learned his name. He had tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "This is my fault." "You're alive," I told him. "That's what matters." He handed me his business card. "When I build my first building, I'll name it after you." I smiled politely, but we both knew it sounded like something said in the moment. I never saw him again. Disability checks didn't cover the rent. Eleanor was pregnant. Madison was born 8 weeks after the collapse. I took a job as a night security guard at a warehouse on the south side. The metal went into a box in the basement. I stopped talking about the fire. Eleanor didn't want to hear about it. Madison grew up believing her father was just a man who limped. 40 years is a long time to be invisible. I worked night security in office buildings all across Chicago. Different buildings, same limp. The L3, L4 injury never truly healed. Some days were manageable. Some days I needed a wheelchair. I stopped mentioning the fire entirely. No one wanted to hear that story. Madison was 5 when she found the medal in the basement. "Daddy, what is this?" she asked. I knelt down, my back screaming in pain. "I used to be a firefighter." Eleanor's voice cut in immediately. "Put that away, Ethan. Focus on the future, not the past. We have bills to pay." The medal went back into the box. We never spoke about it again. Madison grew up hearing only one version of the story. Your father had an accident. He lives on disability. She never heard the truth. She never heard, your father is a hero. He saved 16 lives. At family gatherings, Eleanor used to introduce me the same way every single time. "This is my husband. He's retired." When Madison was a teenager and her friends asked about my limp, she would look away, visibly embarrassed. When she eventually became vice president of real estate development, I slowly turned into a footnote in her story. The father who couldn't keep up. The man with the bad back who worked security jobs. I became invisible inside my own home. Eleanor's coldness deepened as the years passed. She was ashamed of me, ashamed of the limp, ashamed of the wheelchair on the bad days, ashamed that I couldn't give her the life she once imagined. "You used to be someone," she would say during arguments. "Now you're just this." I would find myself staring at the basement door, at the box that held the medal inside, at the man I used to be. Captain Ethan Hayes, Chicago Fire Department. 16 lives saved. But that man felt buried beneath 40 years of silence. 40 years. That's how long I had lived as if I didn't exist. And then tonight, I was standing in that ballroom in downtown Chicago. I opened my eyes. The memory faded, and I was back at Madison's promotion party. Raymond Ashford's hand was still resting on my shoulder, firm and steady. The ballroom remained completely silent. Hundreds of people, Executives, developers, the city's elite were staring at us. They had heard everything: the fire, the rescues, the steel beam, the decades of silence. Some of them were quietly wiping tears. I looked at Madison. Her face had gone pale, tears streaming down her cheeks, her mouth slightly open as if she was seeing me for the first time in her life. Then I turned to Eleanor. She looked stunned, like someone had just struck her. Her eyes were wide, lips pressed tightly together. No words, only frozen shock. Raymond gently squeezed my shoulder, his voice heavy with emotion. "This man saved my life 40 years ago," he said to the room. "I have been searching for him ever since." The silence grew even deeper. He slipped his hand into his jacket pocket. "I've carried something with me every single day for 4 decades, he said quietly. Something I promised myself I would show him if I ever found him again. He pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Madison's hand flew to her mouth. Eleanor instinctively stepped back as Raymond slowly unfolded it with care, almost reverence, and held it up for the entire ballroom to see. It was the front page of the Chicago Tribune, dated June 15, 1984. The headline read, "Fire Captain Injured Rescuing Final Victim." And there, in a grainy black and white photograph, was me, 27 years old, my CFD uniform torn and bloodied, being lifted into an ambulance. My face looked young, determined, and in pain. I barely recognized that version of myself. Raymond's voice echoed through the silent room. June 1984. I was 27 years old, a junior architect. I had my whole life planned. He glanced down at the newspaper briefly. I was working on blueprints for a downtown building when the fire broke out. I escaped with the first group, but I had left my blueprints behind. I know it was foolish, but they represented years of my work. His voice tightened. So, I went back for them. The stairwell collapsed behind me. I was trapped on the 4th floor. He looked directly at me, his eyes shining. This man, Captain Ethan Hayes, entered that building 3 separate times that day. The ballroom remained frozen. On the first trip, he saved 6 people. On the second, he rescued 5 more, including me. His crew ordered him to withdraw because the structure was failing. He refused. Raymond's voice cracked slightly. On the 3rd trip, he returned for me because I had been reckless enough to go back inside. He pointed toward me. When the steel beam fell, he shoved me through the opening. It crushed his spine instead of mine. Raymond lifted his shirt slightly. The entire left side of his torso was covered in burn scars, deep, twisted, discolored skin stretching from his ribs to his shoulder. His left arm bore heavy scarring from wrist to bicep. A wave of gasps rippled across the crowd. "These scars are from that fire 40 years ago," he said quietly. "They remind me every single day." Then he gestured toward me again. "His injuries ended his career at 27, so I could have mine." His voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. "I built my entire empire out of guilt and gratitude. Every building my company designs includes advanced firefighter safety systems. I founded the First Responder Foundation because of Captain Hayes. I spent 40 years searching for him. Private investigators, dead ends, false records." He raised the newspaper again. "I knew his name. Ethan Hayes, Chicago Fire Department." And then he vanished. No forwarding address, no public record, nothing. His voice trembled. And tonight, at his daughter's celebration for a new project in downtown Chicago, I finally found him, standing at the back of the room, hiding like he was nobody. Raymond slowly turned toward Madison. "Do you know where your project is being built, Madison?" She shook her head weakly, tears continuing to fall, unable to speak. Raymond's voice softened, but every word carried weight. "On the exact address where your father's spine was crushed while saving my life." He pointed to the memorial plaque design, still displayed on the presentation screen behind us. "That memorial you created for the unknown heroes of 1984. His tone hardened slightly. "Your father is one of them. Captain Ethan Hayes, Chicago Fire Department." Madison let out a broken gasp, her hand covering her mouth. Raymond continued, his voice now sharper. "This man saved 16 lives that day. 16 families went home because he ran into a burning building 3 times when everyone told him it was suicide. He lost his career, his livelihood, and his identity. He spent 40 years working night security, living with chronic pain, becoming invisible even inside his own home. Then he looked directly at her, his voice quiet but devastating. "You are building on the exact ground where your father became a hero, Madison. That memorial for unknown heroes? He is one of them. And tonight, you made him stand behind you as if he were nothing." Madison's face collapsed with emotion. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Dad, I didn't know." Mascara streaked down her cheeks as her hands trembled. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did no one ever tell me?" I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, for the first time in years. "You never asked, Madison," I said quietly. The memories came back. The years of ignoring me, the embarrassed glances at my limp, the casual comments to friends, my dad's just on disability, and never once asking what had really happened. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." "You never wanted to hear about the past," I replied calmly. "You wanted me to stay invisible." Eleanor finally tried to speak. I didn't know it was that serious, Ethan. You never—" Raymond cut her off, his voice turning cold as ice. "He tried to show you. I imagine you told him to forget it and move on." He turned fully toward her. "You made him hide tonight at an event honoring the very place where he was nearly buried alive while saving other people's lives." Eleanor's face flushed red. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The entire ballroom was watching now, silently judging. She stood exposed as the woman who had spent years diminishing a hero. Raymond raised his hand slightly to regain the room's attention. "Captain Hayes, I didn't only find you tonight," he said. "When I finally tracked you down last month, I also located your old crew." The ballroom doors opened. 3 elderly men in suits walked in, backs straight, eyes sharp despite their age. Captain Henry Dalton, in his 70s, white-haired, my former lieutenant. Daniel Mercer, broad-shouldered even now, a firefighter from 1984. Charles Simmons, lean with a gray beard, another firefighter who had been there that day. They moved through the silent crowd directly toward me. Captain Dalton stopped in front of me and stood at attention. Then he saluted. "Captain Hayes," he said firmly. "The Chicago Fire Department never forgot you, sir." My eyes burned instantly. It was the first salute I had received in 40 years. Mercer stepped forward next. "We always wondered what happened to you, Cap." Simmons nodded slowly. "You were the best of us. When you left, it was never the same." Short, quiet embraces followed. Firefighter brotherhood. 40 years of separation dissolved in seconds. Dalton's voice was thick with emotion. "We thought you were dead, or had moved far away. We searched, but—" I interrupted quietly. "I've been here the whole time, just invisible." Fisher gripped my shoulder. "Not anymore, Cap. Never again." Someone in the ballroom began clapping, then another, and soon the entire room erupted into a standing ovation for Ethan Hayes. The invisible man, the security guard, the man with the limp, the hero. My old crew stood beside me, 4 firefighters reunited. Madison sobbed, attempting to move closer, but frozen by shame. Eleanor remained motionless, trapped by her own cruelty. Raymond stood with me, protective and proud. The applause continued. 300 people, some crying, some clapping, honoring 40 years of silence and sacrifice. Dalton at my right, Fisher to my left, Simmons behind, a protective wall of brotherhood. After 30 seconds, Raymond raised his hand, and the room quieted. "I have one more thing," he said, turning to me. He pulled a business card from his pocket. "Captain Hayes, I have an offer for you." He placed the card in my hand. Director, First Responder Foundation. Salary, $200,000 a year. I stared, 6 times more than my security wage. He explained, "The foundation supports injured first responders. We train new firefighters in safety protocols nationwide. I need someone who understands sacrifice, someone who's lived it. You'll work with fire departments across the country, including Chicago." Dalton stepped forward. "The CFD wants you back too, Captain Hayes. As a senior advisor, you'll train the next generation, Teach them what true courage looks like. Raymond handed me an envelope. Back pay for 40 years just to start. I opened it, enough to cover decades of struggle. And one more thing, Raymond said steadily. The building we break ground on next month is being renamed the Hayes Memorial Tower. Your name will be on it forever, Captain. I looked at the card, the check, processing everything. I met Raymond's gaze. I accept on one condition. Name it. I do this my way. No more hiding, no more shame, no more invisibility. Raymond smiled. Captain Hayes, I wouldn't accept it any other way. We shook hands, firm and equal. I turned to Eleanor. I'm moving out tonight. Shock, then anger crossed her face. You can't just... I cut her off for the first time in 40 years. I can, and I will. You spent 40 years making me ashamed of the best thing I ever did. I'm done with that. I'm done with you. Eleanor tried to salvage it. Ethan, please. We can talk. I shook my head. There's nothing left to say. I looked at Madison. If you want to know the real me, visit. But I'm done being invisible, even to my own daughter. She nodded through tears, unable to speak. I turned toward the ballroom exit, letting my limp show fully for the first time in decades. Dalton walked beside me, Fisher on my left, Simmons behind, a protective formation. Raymond walked with us. Behind us, Eleanor called again, Ethan! Ethan! I didn't look back. The doors closed behind us. Outside, the Chicago night air was cold and clean. Dalton's hand rested on my shoulder. You good, Cap? I nodded. Yeah. For the first time in 40 years, I'm good. Fisher grinned. Where to now? Raymond pulled out his phone. Suite reserved, 4 seasons, top floor. Yours for as long as you need. I looked at my 4 men, my brothers, my crew, my future. Sounds perfect, I said. We walked to the garage. My limp visible, unmistakable, and for the first time, I didn't care. 6 months later, I returned to that same address in downtown Chicago, not the broken firefighter buried under rubble, but the man whose name would be carved in bronze at the building's entrance. The November wind cut through the construction site, sharp and biting. My old injury flared, but I sat in my wheelchair without shame. Madison stood behind me, hands on the handles, just present. The memorial plaque gleamed under the gray sky. Captain Ethan Hayes, Chicago Fire Department. Hero, June 14th, 1984. 40 years. 40 years for the world to say it aloud. Raymond's voice cut through my thoughts. This building stands because of this man. The crowd, reporters, city officials, firefighters in dress blues, turned toward me. Dalton at attention, Fisher and Simmons flanking. They saluted. I returned the gesture, hand trembling, not from weakness, but from 40 years of waiting. The mayor handed me a wooden box. The key to the city, Captain Hayes, long overdue. I opened it, brass on velvet, heavy in my hand. Raymond leaned close. Say a few words. Madison wheeled me to the microphone, hands shaking. I reached back, squeezed hers. It's okay, I whispered. I faced the crowd. Young firefighters, old ones, those who never knew me, now you know my story. I did my job, I said, my voice cracking. My brothers did theirs. We ran into fire, because that's what we do. I paused. The wind picked up. For 40 years, I believed that day had ended me, broken me, made me nothing. I looked down at my legs, at the wheelchair. Instead, it had changed the chapter I was writing. The firefighters straightened in response. Some of you will get hurt, some of you already are, and some of you will be forgotten, but not today. They'll stop seeing you. I met Captain Dalton's eyes. He nodded. Don't let them make you invisible. Your scars aren't shame. They're proof you showed up when it mattered. The applause rolled like thunder, but I didn't hear it. I was focused on Maeve, wiping her eyes as she wheeled me away from the crowd. We sat by the construction fence. The skeletal frame of the Hayes Memorial Tower rose behind us, 20 stories of steel reaching for the sky. I quit, Maeve said quietly. What? I asked. The real estate firm. I quit last month. I turned to her, eyes red but clear. I'm building affordable housing for first responders, firefighters, EMTs, police, people like you who gave everything and got nothing back. My throat tightened. You don't have to, I said. I'm not doing it for you, Dad. I'm doing it because of you. There's a difference. She knelt beside the wheelchair and took my hand. I spent 35 years not seeing you. I won't waste another day. I pulled her close. She cried into my shoulder. Real tears. Not the performance tears from the ballroom 6 months ago. These were grief, relief, and love all at once. I'm proud of you, I whispered. I'm sorry it took me so long to make you proud. You're here now. That's what matters. Raymond appeared beside us. The first floor is going to be a training center, he said, for firefighters nationwide. Captain Dalton's already signed on to teach. I looked up at the tower, my name, my legacy, built on the very ground where I'd fallen. At 67, I thought I was done. Raymond smiled. Turns out, Captain, you were just getting started. I looked again at the plaque. Bronze, permanent. My 27-year-old face stared back, young, fearless, but I wasn't that man anymore, and that was okay. The man I'd become, scarred, limping, 67, had something that 27-year-old me didn't. He'd survived long enough to see his story end. Looking back, I realized I'd spent 40 years letting others decide my worth. I let Eleanor's shame become my silence. I let Maeve's embarrassment become my invisibility. I made myself small so they could feel big. Don't do what I did. Don't hide your scars. Don't bury your medals in the basement. Don't let those who should love you make you feel less than. God gave me a second chance at 67. Most people don't get that. Most die invisible, their stories untold, their sacrifices forgotten. Here's what I learned. Your value isn't determined by who recognizes it. I saved 16 lives. That mattered, whether anyone remembered or not. Your scars tell the truth when others won't. The limp, the wheelchair, the pain, they testify to your sacrifice even when your family refuses to. God doesn't waste suffering. He used 40 years of invisibility to prepare me for this. Firefighters building the foundation, finally being the father Maeve needed. It's never too late. At 67, in a wheelchair with a broken back, I still got my happy ending. So here's my advice from an old firefighter. Stop waiting for permission to matter. Stop hiding who you are. Stop letting others make you invisible. You showed up. You sacrificed. That's enough. God sees it even when they don't. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment, they're lessons. If this story touched you, drop a comment about a time you felt invisible. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Grandpa Stories for more true tales of courage, redemption, and second chances. Every scar has a story, and every story deserves to be told. Hit that subscribe button. These Grandpa Stories might just change your life.